Hi everyone, welcome to the February 9th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my usual co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we'll be handicapping last week's racing from around the country, focusing primarily on a couple of Derby preps that took place in New York and Florida, those being the Grade 3 Withers and the Grade 3 Sam F. Davis, both of those offering 10 Derby qualifying points to the winner. We'll take a look back at those races, as well as some other races that took place at those venues, particularly at Tampa Bay Downs, where they ran some other stakes races, including a few on the turf that had some notable winners. Move on to Santa Anita, where they ran a host of graded stakes races on their Saturday card. Also touch upon an impressive maiden winner from Sunday. Then we'll move on to Gulfstream and Oaklawn, where there were a couple of interesting allowance races and stakes events. And we'll finish things up with the aforementioned Aqueduct, where we began, as there were some notable allowance races and some debatable speed figures from last week that we'll get to at the very end of the podcast. But Craig, we're going to start things off with those Derby preps, and I don't think anybody got their Derby horse from either of these races. They were not the fastest preps that we've seen, and definitely some horses that have potential, but they're going to have to run faster in the future.
Yeah, I think these were Derby preps in the way of maybe the Indiana, Iowa, and Oklahoma Derbies, to be honest. But, you never know. They're early race 3-year-olds. I wasn't blown away by anybody, winners or otherwise, but I thought some of the performances were okay.
Let's start off with that Sam F. Davis from Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. Candyman Rocket got the win here, leading a Bill Mott-trained Exacta home over his stablemate Nova Rags. Candyman Rocket was coming off a fairly impressive maiden win, going 6 furlong at Gulfstream Park, and it's a feather in his cap that he was able to stretch out all the way from that 6 furlongs to a mile and a 16th here, and it's just his second start. But this was a pretty slow race for a Derby prep, and it was a little bit ugly coming down to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, it did look slow going in. We had talked about it on the forecast. There were some horses who were going to have to take a jump up, or in the case of the horse who went off the favorite, whose name is inexplicably escaping me right now, known something or other, who just didn't show up for whatever reason. So Candyman Rocket got a 105, which is, we've talked about 2-year-olds running faster speed figures in July at Saratoga, I think. So I just can't get too excited about this. The pace was pretty quick because the final time figure was actually only a 101. So even as far as the Tampa Derby, I would expect there are going to be some horses to come along from other venues and would look a lot stronger than these. I guess the one horse you could talk about as being kind of a trip horse is Hidden Stash, but he's a horse who just seems to cause his own trouble. As you've mentioned, he just will not change leads for whatever reason. He's kind of stubborn, and even if he did, I mean, what was he going to run? A 105 instead of a 101? So I just can't get too excited about anybody from this field.
No, I mean, personally, I thought Hidden Stash got a perfect trip in this race. He saved ground around both turns, tipped out at the top of the stretch like he was going to come with a big run, and he just kind of flattened out a little bit, I guess, due to that lead change issue. And we had talked about it, I think, on the forecast last week. If not there, I know I had mentioned it in my preview of this race, that if you watch this horse's 2 prior races coming in, he just refuses to change leads, kind of like that horse Gunnet that Steve Asmussen trained, that expensive son of Miss Bezalou, who never would change leads in his races, and the riders almost have to pick him up and put him back down to get him to change leads. And Hidden Stash seems to have that same stubbornness in him, but he wasn't able to get that extra burst of energy he needed to carry him to victory here. Candyman Rocket, we'll see what he ultimately turns out to be. I kind of get the sense that he's not really a 1.25 mile kind of horse, but he does have some talent. He showed it in his maiden victory last time, so all these horses have the right to improve. I mean, one other horse that I guess we should talk about from this race is the one that you were alluding to, the favorite, Known Agenda for Todd Pletcher. I don't really know what was going on. Maybe it was that Tampa Bay surface that some horses reportedly don't like. I know trainers always try to use that as a built-in excuse, saying that horses don't handle Tampa. I don't know if that's really true or not. This horse, though, he just didn't seem to be happy for the entire running of the race. He was at the back of the pack, showed none of the tactical speed that we had seen from him in some prior starts. He did get going at the very end, but that was when the race was falling apart. So I don't know how much credit I really want to give him for passing tired horses late. Just a horse that I think they have to figure out still.
Yeah, and I did want to bring up, he did come, his races had come over that Aqueduct surface. I know you're a little dubious on this, but I'm just really leery of these horses that ship out of Aqueduct, and I let it kind of bite me here because they just haven't been running particularly well. I actually ran a query last night in my database to to pull up all the stakes winners who have won over the winter meet at Aqueduct, where we have it as one of those really slow tracks. I use 6 or lower on our TimeformUS scale as the rating. And there's been 183 horses that have run back in stakes at other tracks. And they just don't win on it. They've won 14%. And even worse, the ROI is 0.47 cents returned on the dollar. And if you eliminate a one horse funny guy who had a couple nice wins at big prices after winning a stakes at Aqueduct, that drops all the way down to 35 cents on the dollar. So it's just, to me, it's such a different racetrack than what you see anywhere else, particularly shipping to Florida. I really need to remind myself to be leery of these Aqueduct horses.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think it's fair to say that a lot of those races in the winter at Aqueduct do come up weaker than graded stakes races that we see at other tracks for the rest of the year at Naira, Belmont, and Saratoga. That's no real mystery. And the Aqueduct track is very quirky. We're going to get to a discussion of that at the very end of this podcast that I think is kind of fascinating, and you can get really in the weeds about why that is. But you make some good points, and it's interesting to cite that data there. With Known Agenda, I mean, I'll go back to his debut. He had run really well at Belmont. That was arguably one of the best races of his career when he was second to Highly Motivated, that really good Chad Brown horse who came back and won at Keeneland. So to me, it's not like he really improved at Aqueduct. He's just been a good horse all along that took his show on the road to a different track, and he didn't take it to Tampa. I don't really know what the issue was, but he's one that Pletcher's going to have to get figured out fast because this was not a good effort. Moving on to a race at Aqueduct, we'll discuss the other Derby prep, the Grade 3 Withers, before getting to the rest of the Aqueduct races at the end of the podcast. This one was won by Risk Taking, the favorite in this race, coming off a maiden victory going that same 1.125 two-turn distance at Aqueduct, and he improved his speed figure, took the kind of step forward you want to see from a horse at this time of year. Again, this wasn't the fastest race in the world, but he was certainly more visually impressive than any horse we saw in the Sam F. Davis.
Yeah, he looked good. He was the clear-cut winner of this one over Capo Kane, who wound up going off the second choice. The bettors got it right. This wasn't an easy speed figure to make, as you said. We'll talk about this more on some more questionable races later on. If I had to put a confidence rating on it, I'd say maybe 3.5 out of 5 stars I'd give it, because I think it was the only two-turn route that day, and the track's just been really goofy there. I think the Super's doing a lot of work on it during the card, which can often make it change race to race, and it just makes it a really tough job. So I don't want to put a whole lot of stock on the figure. I mean, a 109 is solid enough. It's better than what we saw in the Davis, but I'm not sure he was really beating much. The two behind him, Overtook and Capo Kane, I mean, they're decent enough, but none of these horses are Derby horses. I mean, the winner's the only one I could possibly see even making any kind of run there. So good effort from him, what you'd expect, and I will be curious to see where he shows up next. I heard he'll be in the Wood next, bypassing the Gotham, which would make sense, because I can't remember if the Gotham is actually a turn back in distance or not. For some reason, I'm thinking it is, but looking forward to see what he does, but a little skeptical of him still.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said. This horse looked good in victory. I'm not really sure what was behind him. I mean, Capo Kane, I thought he ran his race. He was just coming out of a Jerome that turned out to be pretty weak, and the speed figure kind of said that. He, I think, earned just a number in the high 90s from us for that Jerome score, and he actually improved in this Withers and seemed to handle the 1.125 distance. Just a little bit of pace pressure on the front end, which he didn't get in the Jerome. That did him in at the end of this race. Though, risk-taking, he in particular had no trouble getting this 1.125 distance. I mean, no surprise he won his maiden going this far, but he's got a pedigree that says he really does want to run all day, and the way he finished off both this race and his prior race suggests that 1.25 miles down the line, and potentially even farther than that, is going to be right up his alley. So I like this horse. I'm a fan of his. I like the way he's coming along. It just seems like he's really woken up since Chad Brown put the blinkers on. He's gotten himself more in the game, and I thought Eric Consell gave him a good ride, kind of keeping him in the clear and riding him like he was the best horse. He's just going to have to run faster in the future. It's certainly possible, and as you said, Chad Brown's going to wait for the Wood Memorial next to keep him out of the 1.125 distance. That Gotham, it is a one-turn mile, so I think they're trying to avoid that turn back in distance. But he's just one that seems to have potential, but he's going to have to show it that he can improve down the line.
Point about the distance. Of all the 3-year-olds we've seen this year, I think he's the one that it's just really not a question for. I will be curious to see if Capo King turns back into that Gotham, because it seems like a race that would just fit him to a T.
Moving on to some races from Santa Anita. They ran, I think, a quartet of graded stakes races on their Saturday card, including a couple on the turf, and we'll begin with those. The Grade 2 San Marcos for the older horses going 1.25 miles was won by Master of Foxhounds with Joel Rosario up. Got a perfect trip, sitting right off Acclimate, kind of in single file behind him, took over from that one in the stretch, and won off pretty impressively, but I'm just not sure this was the strongest field for a Grade 2.
No, it's just what we've been saying about Southern California turf racing for a couple of years now. It was just okay. I mean, he got a 118 time for win a lot of Grade 2 races outside of California on the grass for sure. So just same old in California. We have Richard Baltus and Phil D'Amato run 1-2. The top two were 1-2 around the track, just switching positions at the end. So not a whole lot for me to get excited about.
Yeah, it was kind of funny to watch this race because there were 6 horses and almost the entire field was racing in single file for the entire race, except for one horse starting over, who actually ran pretty well to get up for third, considering that he lost more ground than everybody else. But just not the most thrilling race from a quality standpoint or kind of watching it unfold. The winner could be okay, but he'll face some tougher tests in the future.
Yeah, and starting over is a great barometer. I mean, he had come over from the East Coast, not competitive in stakes. He won a maiden claiming race, and out there he's suddenly competitive in good allowance and stakes races. So it just kind of shows the disparity in talent in the turf division.
Now, while it didn't come back a much faster race, I was more impressed from a visual standpoint by the winner of the Grade 3 Thunder Road, that being Hit the Road. This horse was coming off a pretty lengthy layoff into this race. I think he hadn't run since last summer at Del Mar, making his 4-year-old debut here, and he just traveled like a winner every step of the way, showed uncharacteristic early speed, and still kicked for home impressively. This seems like a good horse, though I'm not really sure that there was a ton of quality behind him.
Yeah, I mean, Bob and Jackie had been running okay. He didn't really show up. Sambaye, we had thought maybe would improve this time out, and he didn't. Those two went at it. I say went at it using air quotes on the front end because the pace was at best moderate. It looked like they were being kind of choked back quite a bit to not fight each other, and it just didn't matter. The road tipped out and just blew by him. I mean, I guess it could be argued he got a great trip in behind him, but when the pace isn't fast, I thought it was still impressive to be able to just run by those top two like they were standing still. He only got a 117 TimeformUS speed figure, but if you ask me, I think he could have gone faster if he had to. It's just one of those cases where the horses in front of him didn't show up, and he did what he had to do to win. So tough to get a read on him for me, speed figure wise at this point, but when he runs back, I think he'll do better than what we saw with that 117.
Yeah, I think he's a hard horse to really chart the progression of, because he had raced a bunch of times as a 2-year-old and had shown promise, and he only got in 2 starts as a 3-year-old, so you don't really know where he was last year. He never got any momentum going, and now he came off another long layoff here. He definitely has talent. I mean, he's won 3 in a row now over the course of the past year, so he could take another step forward second off the layoff, but he'll probably face some tougher tests in the future. I just think this is a good horse, though. I love the way he traveled early in this race because he had been more of a deep closer in the past. He used some tactical speed here to get position in a race that was really strung out early, despite the fact that the pace wasn't that fast, as you pointed out. There was a big gap from first to last. I mean, Campaign was the last horse, so no surprise there was a big gap back to him. But even some other horses in here, like Hembry, they were way out of it early. None of the others really made up a ton of ground from the back, but Hit the Road, he was just in command throughout. Moving on to the dirt, there were a couple of races for the 3-year-olds on Saturday at Santa Anita. The one for the Colts was the San Vicente going 7 furlongs, and this one was dominated by Bob Baffert as his 2 charges, Concert Tour and Freedom Fighter, fought it out to the wire. Concert Tour was the big favorite, and I think a lot of people were high on him and expecting a big step forward here. I'm not sure we really got it. We got the big step forward from Freedom Fighter, but these two still put on a show to the wire.
They did, and man, Fighter flew out of the gate. I mean, that's what you want to see on a rail horse. You want to see him break and get put into the race so they don't get shuffled back. But he was just flying up front. We have that fraction coated in red. And I thought he was really game, but Concert Tour did what he had to. He was able to wear him down late. He got a 111 TimeformUS speed figure. Freedom Fighter actually got a 112 for setting that quicker early pace, and he was under pressure from the two horses well during that. He was up there by himself, but I thought the top two ran just fine. I do want to mention that Santa Anita is just having timing problems currently, particularly at these sprint distances of 6.5 and 7 furlongs. So pay zero attention to the fractions you see. All of these races are really much faster than what's coming up on the clock. It's been passed on to the people who can hopefully get it fixed, but for now, the clock literally means nothing. I'm timing all the races from video to make the figures. For some reason, the 6 furlong times are fine. All of the 6.5 are bad, and the 7 are hit or miss. Some are good, some are not. So it's kind of a nightmare, but take those fractions that you see on the screen with a grain of salt when you're watching.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because there was a bit of a visual dissonance in some of these races, watching these horses fly out of the gate and then see a opening quarter go up in 23 and change. It just didn't really make sense. So that's good information that you want to look for some hopefully amended times and fractions from those races in the future. But I know that the speed figures that you created were based on the times that you used from video. I get the sense that both of these horses, Concert Tour and Freedom Fighter, they're not really Derby horses. Looking through their pedigrees, Freedom Fighter in particular looks like a sprinter, a pretty fast sprinter at that, but a sprinter. And Concert Tour, I know some people were kind of getting a little bit optimistic about him maybe stretching out. He looks like more of a sprinter to me as well, and the way that he finished off this race and had to really work to get by Freedom Fighter, I was expecting better out of him. So nice horses, just not sure that we're going to see them progressing on the Derby trail per se.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, nothing in this race screams that they want to go any. It's probably going to be about their best distance, maybe even a little shorter in the case of Freedom Fighter. But the California doesn't exactly have a plethora of sprinters out there right now, so maybe it could help bolster that division.
We did potentially see a contender for the Kentucky Oaks in the Grade 3 Las Virgenes early on this Saturday card, as Moonlight Doro, who had been so impressive breaking her maiden going 2 turns at Los Alamitos in her prior start, made her stakes debut here, and she won in stylish fashion. I don't know if it was the fastest race that she's capable of running, but I certainly liked the way that she did it from a visual standpoint.
Yeah, I did as well. She only pitching. I mean, I'm not ready to anoint her a Kentucky Oaks favorite or anything, but I do think she's got more under the hood and could certainly run faster than what we saw. Just without the pace and with her running style, you're never going to see her max speed figure on a day like this. But visually, it was impressive, and she's not one I'd be itching to bet against next time based on that effort.
No, I mean, I question the quality of the other favorite in here, Calypso. I thought that she had been taking advantage of some relatively weak fields, even though she had some stakes credentials coming into this race. But Moonlight Doro, to me, she was much the best in here. I mean, the pace was slow, and that move that she made around the far turn from about the 3/8 pole to the quarter pole was just so impressive. She went from last to first in the span of less than a furlong. I mean, it was just a 5-horse field, but that's still a pretty impressive move, almost like she was running on the turf. And she continued on and won off impressively. She's got a nice pedigree on the dam side, daughter of Medaglia d'Oro. I'd imagine that the way that Richard Mandel is bringing her along, we haven't seen the best of her yet. So I'd be a little optimistic about her, even though she only got a 101 TimeformUS speed figure here. Finishing up Santa Anita, we're going to talk about one race from Sunday. This was one that I know that a lot of eyes of the racing world was on for a different reason, as the highly touted Bob Baffert first-time starter Bezos was making his debut in this race. I know many were looking at him as a potential Kentucky Derby contender just based on workouts, even though he had never actually run a race. And I think the air has been let out of that balloon at this point because Bezos was an early factor in this race, but he faded pretty badly once the field came past the quarter pole, though I think a different star might have been born in this race, as the winner, Dream Shake, was making his debut, ran a very fast speed figure, and looks like a rising star in this division.
Yeah, I don't have the official speed figure for him yet, but looking at the worksheet and just as similarly as we talked about before, using video timing for this race, this was a fast race. I would guess it's going to get about a 116 from us. I think I read somewhere he got a 96 buyer, so it looks like we probably agree pretty much on that front. And, it was just a really fast race for a 2-year-old, and it comes from the Peter Yurton barn, who isn't really known to send them out totally cranked up first time out. Now, this one probably surprised them. I'm not one when this happens with Trent first out. I don't expect this horse to jump up like a normal second time starter would for him. But I think he surprised his connections. He certainly surprised the bettors, and but he looks like the real deal. And based on his breeding, I mean, I'll leave that to you more than me, but it sure seems like he could go farther than what we saw.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that might have led you to believe that maybe this horse was live was that Peter Urton reached out to Joel Rosario to take the mount. Not a rider that he uses very much, and certainly not with first-time starters, because as you said, I mean, he doesn't win much with first-time starters at all. I think this was his first one in at least 2 years. I didn't go back through all the data, but I'm just looking at the short stats in the daily racing form. So definitely a bit of a surprise here, but it was a race where Bezos just took up so much of the dialogue coming in that some horses that probably were training well got ignored on the board, Dream Shake being one of them. Speaking of his pedigree, I mean, he is a son of Twirling Candy, who has an excellent record with debut winners and just precocious horses in general. But on the dam side, I mean, there's real quality here, and quality for this horse to get better over time. The dam wasn't much herself, but the dam is a half-sister to Synchrony, who competed at a high level up until he was about 8 years old, routing on the turf. Also a half-sister to Chocolate Kisses, who was a routing stakes winner, I think racing on both dirt, but primarily turf. I mean, both turf, but primarily dirt, I should say. So there's definitely route pedigree on the dam side for this horse, and just a really exciting prospect, especially if this was not his ceiling yet. Based on who's training him, you'd have to think that there's potential for better in the future. And this was just a strong race overall, because I think even the second and third place finishers ran well, especially the third place finisher, who was coming out of a maiden, a runner-up finish in his first start, Mr. Impossible. He was part of the pace here that really did fall apart, and he held decently for third. But this seems like a race that we're going to have some horses coming out of that do have quality in the future.
Yeah, Mr. Impossible was coming out of that concert tour maiden race. And for the record, I think the opening pace figures going to be about 144 to kind of emphasize how you just can't pay attention to the fractions. I'm nearly certain that was a sub 22 opening quarter that we saw. And both the second and third place finishers had already run north of 100 on the TimeformUS speed figure scale. So Dream Shake maiden field here, I think is a pretty strong field edge.
And I have to say, with Bezos, I know a lot of people were so committed to this horse being a star, and they're willing to just give him a pass for this race. I mean, he was part of the pace. I have to say, and I don't mean this to be a red board, because even though I was only saying this privately to a few people before the race, I don't think I tweeted it. I mean, I didn't get the hype on this horse. I mean, I watch a lot of workouts on XBTV. I'm not going to pretend that I'm some clocking expert, but I feel like I've watched a lot of workouts and I know what I'm looking at. And I don't know why this horse garnered so much hype. He was not working like other stars that we've seen from the Bob Baffert barn. I mean, he looked, I guess, better than average, but I just don't know where all of this talk came from, or was where it was based in, that he was some future star. It was a mystery to me, and he ran like a horse that maybe slightly better than average, but not much more than that.
Yeah, I think he was working a lot better in the summer before something happened. And I'm with you. I didn't get the hype here. I didn't bet the race, but I just didn't see it. Of course I watched it, and he probably didn't run as bad as people were making it out to be, given what the pace was. But he didn't change leads. He basically packed it in down the lane. So, he's far from a star at this point, and he'll probably get bet again when he shows up again. So maybe worth taking a shot against.
Let's wrap up some other venues that we mentioned at the top of the show, going back to Tampa Bay Downs, where the feature was that Sam F. Davis. They ran a couple of turf stakes on that card that had impressive winners, including the Grade 3 Endeavor for the fillies and mares. This one was won by Counterparty Risk, a very lightly raced 4-year-old for Chad Brown, only making the fourth start of her career and just collecting her second victory. But this is a filly that's risen pretty quickly in the ranks in the Chad Brown barn, and seems like one that has real potential moving forward.
Yeah, she does. This was a really tricky speed figure to make because of the crazy slope predicted it. I know we talked about it, and it played out exactly as you said, where a horse who we really didn't think had much chance, No Mercy Percy, was going to set the lead and was going to get inhaled by the favorites. And that's exactly what happened. I did have to laugh watching live and going back and watching the replay. You have to wonder what the guy on the front end was doing. He literally looked behind him at least 30 times in the first quarter mile, then was doing it again in the stretch. It led to some not very happy words from Junior Alvarado from that rider, Santos, who I'm not all that familiar with, to be honest. I guess he thought maybe he cost him his best trip, and he very well may have, but you just wonder in a race like that if the stewards ever say anything to the jockeys, because that guy, I don't know what he was doing out there. But outside of that, figure wise, it wound up with a 120. It gets a big pace upgrade from Timeform US. I'm going to be a little leery of the figure, but I thought she ran really well, and it wouldn't surprise me if she can do that again. But just wanted to be known it wasn't rated with all the other turf races. It was just impossible due to the slow nature of the early going.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was watching that race, I was almost reminded of that Sword Dancer that was won by Flincher, where that other Juddmonte entry mate of his was entered as a rabbit, and Joe Bravo was on that horse, and he kept kind of looking behind him to see when he was supposed to move over to let Flincher through. I mean, obviously, No Mercy Percy's not chained by Chad Brown, and has no connection to Counterparty Risk, but visually, it kind of reminded me of that situation. I don't know what the rider was doing on that horse, but whether the horse was drifting out of her own volition or not. Definitely opened a big path for Counterparty Risk to come through at the top of the stretch. But regardless of her perfect trip, she seems like a pretty talented horse. It's atypical for Chad Brown to skip allowance conditions altogether with one of these horses and move them right into stakes company off a maiden win, and she's responded to it well, so you have to think there's better from her in the future. More race to talk about from Tampa Bay Downs. That one's for the Colts and older horses, the Tampa Bay Stakes. And this one was won by Get Smokin'. We had talked about it on the forecast last week. There were two key speed rivals in this race, and they figured to hook up on the front end. Well, I guess Get Smokin' didn't get that memo because he seemed completely content to stalk the other speed in this race. Proven Strategies took over from that one at the top of the stretch and just got the jump on all the closers.
Yeah, I was impressed by Get Smoking. He got a 119 Timeform US speed figure, but more so impressed at the way he was able to kind of rate off of the speed. And I say rate loosely because he was still going pretty fast. His pace figure at the half mile was still a 134. So Proven Strategies was moving up there, but he had plenty left to hold off towards the end. It never looked like he was going to get caught to me. And Eons is a decent enough horse. So, I mean, a 119 is about a grade 3 type figure. I'm not sure how much more he has in the tank, but he still is an early 4-year-old, and maybe, especially if he goes a little shorter, like the mile distance, could be right up his alley. He looks like one with a lot of talent that could make some noise this year.
And we talked about the pace of the Endeavor. Some people might be wondering how Get Smokin' got a speed figure that's basically equal to Counterparty Risk, even though this race went nearly 3 seconds faster than the other one, and that just has everything to do with the pace. They went so much faster in the early going of this Tampa Bay compared to the Endeavor, and that's going to always affect the final time on the turf. But I agree with you about Get Smokin'. I mean, he was stalking a pretty fast pace here, and Proven Strategies faded to the back of the pack. The race did kind of fall apart behind Get Smokin' after he made that early move to the front end. I was impressed by him. I think he's still probably his best going a flat mile, and I'd like to see him turn back to go that distance in the future. But this seems like a horse that's really taken a step forward from his 3-year-old season to his 4-year-old season, and we could see some nice things from him. Moving on to Oaklawn Park, where they ran the featured King Cotton Stakes on their Saturday card. They got plenty of rain down there. It was a wet track, but that did not bother Bulldor, who Craig smartly suggested to win, pick to win this race at 9-1. You made a great observation about his prior race at Delta Downs, and he took a nice step forward here to beat this field.
Yeah, every now and then things go right, and that happened in this one. We talked about it. It was a race that was predicted to be a slow pick early, and it just didn't matter. Boldor was able to stay up closer at the longer 6-furlong distance and just wore down Seven Nation Army, Mr. Jägermeister, and one of my favorite horses in training, Flagstaff, because if I could just bet races with Flagstaff in them, I would have a great ROI the last couple of years, to be honest. Hard knocking horse. I never dislike a horse, of course, but he's just one that I think bettors should look forward to because he always takes more money than he should. And big effort from Boulder. He's now 2 for 2 since he's been gelded, and he got a speed figure, but I think there's probably more in the tank. I think the pace held him back a little bit. It was a sloppy track where not a lot of horses were closing and making up grounds. Surprised me if this turns out to be another really good sprinter for Steve Asmussen.
Yeah, he's a horse that towards the beginning of his career, I know they had tried a bunch of different things with him, and it seems like now he's found his niche as a sprinter and a closing sprinter at that. We'll see how strong this race comes up in the long run. I mean, Flagstaff, he ran his usual race, as you alluded to. He's always right there, but doesn't always get the job done at a short price. And the others, I mean, Seven Nation Army, Mr. Jägermeister being right there at the wire, they're not really graded stakes level sprinters, even though they've run some nice speed figures in the past. So we'll see. I think Boulder was the best in this race, and we'll just have to see if he continues stepping forward in subsequent starts. One other race to talk about from Oaklawn last week was an allowance race that took place on Thursday. Snapper Sinclair, that old classy runner, also for Steve Asmussen, was stepping out of stakes company here. I think he was coming out of a second place finish at the Cigar Mile, got the class relief that he needed in this 2-turn 1 mile test, and was able to get his first victory since 2019.
Yeah, I thought it was a decent enough effort to highlight for our show. He got that 116 TimeformUS speed figure, which was a point higher than what he had run when second in that Cigar Mile at Aqueduct on the week after Thanksgiving. I think I almost said Thanksgiving weekend. He beat Klainsman on the show. He always seems to run his race. The pace was pretty slow early. Snapper Sinclair was able to sit up fairly close to it and just wear him down. So I'm sure he'll be moving back in the stakes company. I always forget the name of that middle stakes race. I know the Razorback is this upcoming weekend, and then there's the Oaklawn Handicap on Oaklawn on Arkansas Derby Day, but there's one more in between, and I suspect that's where we'll see him next.
Yeah, he definitely earned the right to step back up into stakes company off this kind of confidence builder. Moving on to Gulfstream Park, back down to Florida, where there weren't really any stakes races of note last weekend, but there were a couple of impressive allowance winners. One of those that I wanted to talk about from last Wednesday at the beginning of the week was Lake Avenue, a nice 3-year-old filly last year for Bill Mott that had shown some talent early on. Things went awry a little bit. She was off for a long time, made one start last fall. It was a little disappointing, but she got back on track here against Allowance Company, making her 4-year-old debut. And while the speed figure didn't come back that fast, I think that she was prevented from running a faster number by her stutter step slow start.
Yeah, that, and I would also say the pace, which we have coded in blue. It was pretty slow throughout, and as you mentioned, because of that start, she was off the pace, but she got a 107 TimeformUS speed figure. Really solid effort from her, and I was impressed. She was a horse who was kind of at the top of the division for a while. She had won that Demoiselle, so and what actually impressed me the most here was how she was able to regroup after that bad start and actually pass horses, because it's something we had never really seen from her in her career. So it's always a plus. Speed is never a bad thing. I don't want to make that mistake, or people think that's what I'm saying, but it also never hurts to be able to have some versatility. And when you don't break well, or maybe when there's horses who are just a little faster early, but you have more talent, you don't have to go duel with them. So she's one I expect some pretty big things from this year.
Yeah, that's how I wanted to talk about the race, because she showed that new dimension. And even though it wasn't the fastest race, I thought it was a really good effort for her. You do worry a little bit about a horse gaining a habit of breaking slowly, because that also was her undoing in that November race at Churchill Downs, where she did not overcome the slow start. So you don't want to see them breaking slowly every time. But the fact that she is able to adapt her running style as she did here, that's a good sign. One other race to talk about from Gulfstream Park last weekend was a race from Sunday on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies, as Jouster, who had been such an impressive maiden winner with her in her first start on the turf last month at Gulfstream when she won going 2 turns off by many lengths. She was making her second start on the grass here against allowance foes, bet down to be the 1-9 favorite, and didn't get the job done as impressively as last time, but I think a lot of that was due to some of the interior fractions.
Yeah, she was going pretty quick up front. I don't have the official speed figure for her, but it looks like she's going to get about a 111, so basically match what we saw from her last time. And as you said, she was flying early. She definitely was slowing down late. The pace figure at the 6 furlong mark is going to be about 25 points higher than her final time figure, so she'll definitely get a pace boost off of whatever her final time figure is. These kind of are a little tough to figure out. You don't know if this is maybe the limit of her distance, or as things get tougher, it's a tough style to win with on turf. We know that, and it's just a matter of if they can get her to maybe rate a little bit, because she obviously has talent, but it's going to be tough to step up and beat higher class horses when you're slowing down that fast in a turf race.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing about it was that she wasn't ranked at all. It's not like she was running off on the front end. Luis Saez was getting after her on the far turn to open up on the field, almost like he wanted to put on the same kind of show that she did in her maiden victory, and she just couldn't do it here. I mean, she couldn't keep up going at that pace. Part of it might have been due to the fact that there was plenty of rain in Florida, and the turf course came up good. It was definitely on the tiring side, and you could see her noticeably shortening stride at the end of this race. But on the turf, it's hard to start a run all the way back at the half-mile pole and sustain it to the finish, even if you're a very good horse. So I'm willing to forgive her for slowing down so much at the end. I still think there's quality here. They just need to get a little bit realistic about the way that you need to ride a front runner on the turf.
Yeah, and not to be the guy. I mean, I know it gets tired of me talking about timing, but this was a race that was actually faster than what it is shown on the clock. Trackus, I've talked about it many times. They have trouble timing races where there's a short run up. This was a run up of 5 feet, so I forget what the exact adjustment was, but it was in line with maybe half a second faster. She ran at all the calls, and when you consider there was very little run up, it shows just how fast she was actually going.
No, that's good information because you see the posted fractions and a 25 opening quarter followed by a 45 and 4 half mile for the next half in the race is unusual, but it's a feather in her cap that she was able to go even faster than that and still hold on. So definitely a filly that I think has talent, but she'll face tougher tests in the future. And just before we move on, shout out to the runner-up Gladys, who is that full sister to Rachel Alexandra, who seemed like she was turning out to be a bit of a disappointment, but she was definitely helped to get close at the end by the fact that Jouster is coming back to the field, but maybe she has more of a future on the turf.
Yeah, I actually looked it up. The race was about 3/5 faster at every call, so no doubt about it. She was flying, and they're going to be fractions all coded in red for sure.
Let's finish up the show at Aqueduct, which I mentioned at the start. It was just one of those typical weeks at Aqueduct where it seemed like the track was getting faster and slower, and we had snow in the area and would cause a wet track on some days, a drying out track, then more moisture coming in. Just a really difficult situation, I think, for speed figure makers especially. I'm going to insert one race that I didn't put on the rundown. That was from yesterday, Monday's card, where Miss Brazil won the Ruthless. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It was just a 3-horse field, but this is a filly for Tony Duttro that I think has some talent.
Yeah, she won her maiden race very impressively, obviously, and she came back and backed it up. I think it's going to be about a 110 TimeformUS speed figure, a final time figure of 105, boosted for a pretty quick pace in there. So I think it was a really good effort. As a speed fit for Monday, my assistant is, but it looks like about a clear cut a day as a split variant as you'll ever see. The track seemed to get much faster after the first 5 races, so it will be interesting to see what my partner does, but I'm almost sure that's what's going to happen. She's going to get around a 110 TimeformUS because it was that clear, and it will kind of lead into the further discussion. I was almost going to joke with, I got to go now. Sorry, David, because this stuff can be very frustrating at times, but yeah, the Aqueduct track has just been a nightmare for speed figure making all the time. Lately, it's just been changing a lot day to day in card. Within the card, we'll get 2-3 different switches that are pretty apparent when you do this for a living. And all I can guess is the track superintendent is constantly working on the track during the day, and it just makes things difficult for guys like me and Andy Byers' team and whoever else is out there making speed figures, because it's just been really tough. I saw another guy who I respect a lot, Paul Matisse, talk about it, saying he wishes the superintendent would just leave the track alone, that it's almost his duty to. I really don't know. I mean, maybe it's a safety thing. I have no idea, but it does make for a tough job and some figures that are very hard to make, as a couple we're going to talk about. And just something for bettors to keep in mind when you see these numbers from Aqueduct, that they're not really set in stone. They're more kind of in, I mean, not that I'm going to go back and change them, but they're kind of fuzzy. They're not that crisp, clear. Like we were going to talk about, Gone Glimmering got a 121. I would say it could be anywhere from 121 is probably about the max to a 112. I mean, it wouldn't shock me. It's just that's how tough they are to make these days.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw that statement. I disagree with that statement about the responsibility of the track super. I think when you have weather going on and a track drying out, it's the responsibility to get the track in the safest condition for the horses to run over. And it's difficult to make it a consistent surface for the bettors. I mean, I don't want to make excuses, but I think if you're trying to see how the track is playing in the first race of the day at Aqueduct, and you're just assuming that it's going to be the same for the rest of the day, it seems a little naive to me, based on all the evidence that we've seen from Aqueduct for the rest of the winter, that would be the case. You have to kind of build into your own wagering that there might be a change coming, and that's difficult to do. But for me personally, when I'm watching these races, I more try to assess things at the end of the day and just use it moving forward. Look back at the day, how was the track playing, especially with regard to track biases, rather than trying to assume that the track bias is going to be there for the entire day. Just do an assessment at the end of the day and say, okay, who was helped, who was hurt, and how can I use that information moving forward? And I mentioned a track bias because I think we did have one of those yesterday when Miss Brazil ran, though I'm not sure how much it helped Miss Brazil, because it seemed like it got much more pronounced late in the day when horses were really helped and helped along to run some much faster speed figures than you would, or at least times than you would have expected from them at the end of that card. But you mentioned the Gone Glimmering race from last Friday, an allowance race for the fillies, and I know I was emailing you back and forth about both this number and the next one we're going to talk about, because I had a bit of a disagreement about how these were handled, and it's tough. I can't. I mean, I said to you, I disagree, but I can't present concrete evidence for why I'm right and somebody else is wrong, because it does seem like the track is changing so much, and you really don't know. Personally, my belief is that a horse like Gone Glimmering and the others in this race, like Stand for the Flag, they are not the kinds of horses that should be earning numbers in the low 120s or really even the 1-teens. They're just lower level allowance horses that happened to run on a day when it seemed like the track was changing quite a bit. But I know it's tough. And the next race we're going to talk about, with a one from Thursday going that same 1 mile distance for the Colts, Tot Weege, an expensive runner for Todd Pletcher. I thought this horse was very impressive, and he ran an extremely fast mile race compared to the other mile races on this card. But I know that you could also say that the track just randomly sped up for this race in the middle of the day.
Yeah, that was one that was almost like yesterday, the Tot Weege race. The first three, I think it was, races of the day seemed to be run over a different racetrack than all the races, race 4 and later. Other than the last race of the day, which seemed to go back to the earlier races. So is use the data, try to use the math. What I try to do is get as many statistical data points as I possibly can that make sense and put them together. And for this day, I actually don't have too many problems with the figure Tot Weege got. I mean, when I look at the charts for all of the early races, the first 3 races, and then I look at races 4 and on, all the figures seem to make sense. Nobody's in the fields getting huge jump uppers or huge fall off. So I would say I'm pretty confident in that one. I'm a lot less confident in the Gone Glimmering number, and I'll probably revisit that here in the next couple of days. I'm not saying it'll change, because it's still a really hard day, and I don't want to just start knocking back speed figures because they don't look right to me. And I admit that one doesn't. I told you that offline in the email, but it's just tough at Aqueduct, and something for bettors to keep in mind. And as you said, I'm with you. I'm not going to knock the track superintendent. I've certainly never been. There's certainly reasons why he does what he does, and it causes changes in the track. And I do think we saw that yesterday. I don't think it's a coincidence that the bias got stronger as the track got faster. I think something changed, and I don't think it was any coincidence at all. And that's going to happen. And you just kind of follow along. And if you're a really diligent bettor, these are situations you can take advantage of in the future. It can be frustrating on those days, when you're trying to figure out what's going on. But I'm more like you, where I like to try to to assess things after the day is complete, not during, because for me, at least, it leads me to making a lot of bad bets if I presume a bias that may or may not be there next time, and I may or may not be right anyway. So just tough tracks, but it's something that handicappers should relish, in my opinion, because it can definitely offer some opportunity.
And the riders may or may not ride the race that you expect it to be run. It's just very difficult to make bets expecting that a track bias is going to be carrying your horse to victory, because so many things have to go right. Even if you're right about the bias, so many things can happen within the race that make it difficult to bet that race correctly. Just to get back to the horses for a sec, I mean, I do want to spend a moment on TimeformUS because it's difficult. I mean, I think this horse ran a very fast race, and I rarely cite the Beyers on this show to compare them to your speed figures. I mean, Beyer does have this as the tied for the second fastest race that was run the entire year after the Pegasus, going a mile or farther. So I think it is. I think it was a fast race. The gaps between the horses suggest to me that this was an extremely fast race. I feel like TimeformUS is a horse that's shown potential in the past. He is a horse that they bought as a yearling for $2.5 million, son of that Grade 1 winner Tismiz Sue. It seems like they've had hopes for this horse in the past, even though he disappointed at his one stake start prior to this. But the runner-up in this race is also very good, Dreams Untold. He's shown promise at different points last year for John Service, and this was his second start as a 4-year-old, I believe, or he ran once at the end of his 3-year-old season, a pretty impressive victory at Park. So it just felt to me like these are two horses that had the potential to run career best numbers here, and obviously I'm advocating for them having done that, but just based on a visual impression that I got. And it's kind of weird for me because handicapping these Aqueduct races, I'm somebody who typically does rely quite a bit on speed figures. I use Craig's numbers quite a bit in my handicapping. I use the Beyers as well in my handicapping, and handicapping Aqueduct's been difficult because it's hard to have faith that the horses are actually running as quickly as the clock suggests. And I find myself relying a lot more on the visual impressions rather than just the raw times. And it makes it difficult. And this is one of those situations where I think you just have to trust your gut.
Yeah, and I'll just circle back way to the beginning of the show where I brought up that stat that the horses that win stakes at Aqueduct are not reproducing when they go elsewhere. And part of that was the ROI, which was less than 50 cents on the dollar. And there's a very good chance that could be because maybe horses are coming out of these races with speed figures that aren't entirely accurate. Maybe they're overrated. It could be things more than just the surface itself. But it's just pretty intriguing puzzle for me. It's the kind of stuff I actually like and why I have interest in the game. You know, if it was easy, we'd all be, everybody be doing it. It certainly is the toughest game around for me.
That's certainly true. It definitely makes it fascinating, and it gives us something to debate, so that's always fun. But yeah, don't want to make it sound like I'm criticizing Craig or anything like that, and I know he doesn't take it that way. It's just a really difficult job to make sense of these races, and sometimes if you draw a different conclusion than the speed figure maker, it's not saying that you think the speed figure maker is doing a bad job of it. It's just it can be hard to make the numbers fit in to the storyline of the day, and you have to make the best decision and judgment that you can for the wagers that you're going to place in the future. Well, that's all the racing to recap for this week. I know this was a pretty long show. We had an interesting discussion about something getting a little in the weeds at the end. Hopefully people stayed until this point. But thanks for tuning in to this recap, and make sure to stay tuned for our TimeformUS forecast coming up later this week, which we're actually going to record on Thursday this week instead of our typical Friday. We're mostly going to focus on the Fairgrounds card on Saturday. They are running the second race in their series of Derby preps, the Risen Star. Plenty of other undercard stakes on that card, so we'll take a look at that on the TimeformUS forecast upcoming on Thursday. So look out for that when it's dropped in a couple days. Everybody, thanks for listening this week. You can always catch us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening, and look out for that TimeformUS forecast on Thursday.